Welcome to today's devotional message under the banner of Trusting God Always. You prayed, you fasted, you waited, and still silence. Maybe this message is the sign you didn't know you needed. If these words meet you right where you are, like, share, and subscribe. It helps us reach more souls who need God's comfort. Comment below with your favorite Bible promise, or the one you're still holding on to in the waiting. Let's begin, and let His Word breathe new life into yours. The silence feels heavy. You sit by the window, tracing patterns in the dust, the silence outside matched only by the quiet ache within. The world moves on beyond the pain. Cars hum, distant laughter floats on the breeze, the everyday rhythm of lives unfolding. But in this space, yours feels suspended, stuck. You've prayed until the words blurred on your tongue. You've waited through seasons, marking time by the changing leaves or the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. You've poured out your heart, sometimes with a fervent hope that felt like a physical ache in your chest, sometimes with desperate tears that left salt streaks on your cheeks. You've laid bare your fears, your needs, your deepest longings at the foot of the cross, believing, truly believing, that He hears. But the heavens feel silent. The answer you longed for, the breakthrough you desperately need, remains delayed, nowhere in sight. It's not just an inconvenience. This waiting, it feels like a heavy blanket, woven from unanswered questions and mounting anxieties, muffling your faith, pressing down on your hope until it feels fragile, almost extinguished. You feel the weight of it in your shoulders, in the tightness in your chest, in the way you sigh just a little deeper than before. Is He even there? Did He hear? Was my prayer not faithful enough? Was my request too small? Or perhaps too big? These are the whispers that sneak in when the silence stretches, like weeds pushing through barren ground. The enemy loves the quiet places in our faith journey, the times when the noise of the world fades and the only sound is the echo of our own doubts. He tells you God has forgotten, or worse, that He doesn't care. He paints pictures of a distant God, high and lifted up, too busy with cosmos and kings to notice the small, quiet ache in your heart. This feeling, this heavy silence, it's a wilderness season for the soul. It's standing at the edge of a Red Sea that refuses to part, or wandering in a desert where the promised land seems impossibly far. But here's the gentle paradox. Sometimes, God's loudest messages are delivered in the quietest moments. His strength is often perfected, not in the storm's roar, but in the stillness after, or even within the quiet discipline of weathering the gale. He isn't asking for your striving right now. He's inviting your stillness. He isn't demanding you produce a miracle. He's calling you to simply trust the miracle worker. Think of the oil lamp, waiting for the bridegroom. Matthew 25, 1-13. The wise virgins kept oil ready, not because they knew the exact moment He would appear, but because they trusted He would. Their faith wasn't in a timetable, but in the unwavering promise of His coming. In this silence, your faith isn't being ignored. Perhaps it's being refined. The silence isn't necessarily emptiness. It could be preparation. It could be the quiet construction of something you cannot yet see, like roots growing deep underground in the dark, unseen, but vital for the fruit that will one day bloom. Maybe the answer you're waiting for requires a different kind of vision, a different kind of faith? What if his response isn't a booming voice from the clouds, but the gentle stirring of peace in your spirit? What if the breakthrough isn't the path cleared immediately, but the quiet courage to take the next step, still trusting in the unseen guide? This wilderness isn't meant to break you. It's meant to strip away the noise and distraction so you can hear his voice in a way you couldn't before. The silence feels heavy, yes, but perhaps within its weight lies a sacred hush, an invitation to lean closer, listen deeper, and remember that even in the most profound quiet, you are never, ever alone. His presence fills the silence, even when his answer feels delayed. He is here, waiting with you, holding you, teaching you how to walk by faith, not by sight, even when the path forward is shrouded in mist and the only sound is the beating of your own heart. Still trusting God, always. You check the calendar again, as if the date itself holds the key, the secret release code for the promise you've held so tightly. You had it all mapped out, the timeline, the sequence of events, the hopeful expectation of when God would move, how he would answer. But his calendar doesn't match yours. The door you expected to swing open, wide and inviting, remains firmly shut, a solid, unyielding barrier mocking your fervent prayers. The healing you pleaded for, the one you believed would manifest by now, hasn't arrived, leaving you still navigating the same pain, the same limitation. The relationship you poured your heart into mending hasn't healed, the cracks widening, the distance growing despite your every effort. And the provision you desperately needed, the lifeline you prayed would be thrown, hasn't appeared, leaving you feeling exposed, vulnerable, anxious about tomorrow. You find yourself caught in this disorienting space, suspended between the unwavering promise you cling to in your spirit and the stark, unyielding reality you're living in your flesh. It's a place filled with tension, with unanswered questions that echo louder in the silence of the waiting. Did I hear God correctly? Was that promise even for me? Is my faith too small? Did I do something wrong? The wilderness of this not yet is vast, and the path forward feels obscured. You gaze at the closed door, and it feels less like a delay and more like a definitive no. You look at the unchanging circumstances, and doubt whispers that perhaps God has forgotten, or worse, that he simply doesn't care about this specific need, this deep ache within you, this tension, this chasm between expectation and experience is a crucible. It feels like breaking, like being tested beyond your limit. But perhaps it's also the place where true faith is forged, not in the receiving of the promise, but in the waiting for it. Like the disciples huddled in the upper room, waiting for the promised Holy Spirit, with no clear understanding of the timeline or the form he would take. Like Abraham, staring at a silent, starry sky, clinging to a promise that seemed biologically impossible. Their calendars were blank where God's timing should have been, yet their trust was being refined in the absence of immediate fulfillment. Maybe the insight isn't about changing God's calendar, but about understanding the purpose woven into his timing. What if the waiting isn't a delay of the promise, but a necessary part of it? What if the closed door isn't God saying never, but not yet, and trust me to prepare you or the path ahead? The silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's the quiet space where God is doing his deepest work within you, strengthening muscles of faith you didn't know you had. He's not just preparing the blessing, he's preparing the blessed. It's a paradox. The answer feels absent, yet his presence is more potent in the quiet struggle than in the loud victory. You feel abandoned in the delay, yet you are held closer than ever as you lean into his strength. This season isn't about summoning more strength to pry the door open yourself. It's about finding surrender in the stillness. It's about trusting that God's plans are not just different from yours, but infinitely better. His calendar is marked with divine appointments you cannot see, orchestrated for a tapestry far grander than your single thread. The call here is not to frantic striving, but to quiet reflection, to sit with the tension, acknowledging the pain and the questions, but then deliberately turning your gaze back to the one who made the promise. To heal the wounded expectation by anchoring your hope not in the when, but in the who. He is faithful, even when his timing feels foreign. He is working, even behind the closed door. He sees you, even in the silent wilderness. Surrender your calendar and lean into his. His rhythm may feel slow, but it is perfect. You sit in the quiet, the years stretching out before you like an unmarked road. The prayer you whispered feels lost on the wind. The promise you clung to seems to fade with each passing season. You wonder if God heard you at all, or if your hope was just a cruel mirage in your own personal wilderness. Perhaps you've already started building your own solutions, convinced that God needed a little help because the silence was just too loud, the waiting too long. Think of Abraham. Walk back with him to that ancient night. He stood under a canvas of countless stars, a breathtaking panorama of God's creative power. And there, the Creator spoke, not just to the universe, but specifically to an old man with a barren wife. He pointed to the impossible sparkle above and promised Abraham that his descendants would be just as numerous. An absurd, glorious, utterly unbelievable promise to a man who had no child. But Abraham believed. In that moment, under that vast starlit sky, faith surged through him. He took God at his word, and Genesis tells us God credited it to him as righteousness. A profound truth rests here. Believing the promise, embracing the divine declaration of what will be, is the foundation. It is counted. It is holy. Yet that was just the beginning. The promise was spoken, but the waiting began. Years turned into a decade. Then two. The stars remained, distant and silent witnesses to a promise that seemed to be gathering dust. Abraham and Sarah grew older. Human logic screamed louder than the memory of God's voice. Doubt, like a persistent desert wind, began to erode the edges of their initial belief. Impatience, that restless child of unanswered prayers, began to clamor for action. This is where the story takes a turn we often see in our own lives. Convinced that God's plan needed a human nudge, they devised their own solution. Hagar, a desperate, pragmatic step born of tired faith and earthly reasoning. And while this act seemed to solve the immediate problem of airlessness, it introduced layers of pain, conflict, and complication that echoed through generations, creating its own bitter wilderness within Abraham's family. Abraham believed the promise under the stars, yes, but trusting God through the long, silent years when the promise seemed impossible, when the world offered logical alternatives, when the silence felt like abandonment. That was the deeper, more arduous journey. It's one thing to believe in the miracle. It's another to trust the miracle worker through the mundane, unmiraculous days that stretch between the promise and its fulfillment. You might believe the truth, but the true test is trusting the God of truth when everything around you whispers lies of impossibility. The faith credited to Abraham wasn't just a moment. It was ultimately forged in the decades of walking with God, stumbling, getting back up, and learning to trust even when the path was unseen and the destination felt infinitely far away. Sometimes, the greatest act of faith is simply remaining in the waiting, not trying to carve your own way out of the wilderness. The silence isn't just empty. It hums with the quiet thrum of what isn't there. It's the space where a hoped-for phone call doesn't come, where a medical report brings more questions than answers, where the life you pictured remains just that, a picture, not a present reality. This is the ache of unmet longing. It settles deep, a persistent current beneath the surface of your days, coloring everything with a shade of quiet sadness, sometimes bursting into waves of frustration or sharp anxiety. You feel it when you see others stepping into seasons you yearn for, when prayers seem to echo back unanswered from a distant sky, when the path forward is shrouded in a fog so thick you can't see your own feet. This ache is more than just impatience. It's the pain of wanting something good, something you believe God has promised, something deeply aligned with your heart's design. And yet, it remains just beyond reach. It's the wilderness, where the promised land is visible in the distance, but the journey through the sand is long and wearying. It's like carrying a lamp with very little oil, fearing the light will extinguish before the dawn. In this raw vulnerability, the ache asks a piercing question. What is your heart truly relying on? Is it on the delivery itself, the job, the healing, the relationship, the change? Or is it on the deliverer, the God whose nature is steadfast, whose power is boundless, even when his timing is a mystery? The paradox is that sometimes the deepest peace is found not in the end of the waiting, but in the heart of the ache itself. It is here, stripped of easy answers and quick fixes, that faith becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about clinging to the character of Christ. He knows this ache. He felt the weight of unmet longing in the garden, asking for a different path. He understands the fear that God has forgotten. Yet his life and resurrection scream the truth that the story is not over when the ache is deepest. He is not defined by your delivery date, but by his eternal faithfulness. He is not just the God who gives good gifts. He is the good gift. So breathe into the ache. Don't rush to numb it or pretend it away. Let it reveal the tender, exposed places in your trust. This pain isn't a sign of God's absence, but often the very space where he is doing a deep, invisible work within you. He is forging resilience, deepening roots, teaching your soul to find its satisfaction not in temporary things, but in the eternal rock of his presence. Offer the ache back to him, piece by fragile piece. Rest in the quiet certainty that even in the longest night, the morning will come. Not because you forced it, but because he who promised is faithful. Trust the ache to the author of your story. You look at the calendar. Another week slips by. The silence where an answer should be feels heavy, a physical weight pressing down. You prayed. You waited. You showed up, holding on to hope with white-knuckled resolve. But nothing shifted. The path ahead remains shrouded. The door you hoped would open stays stubbornly shut. This waiting, It feels less like preparation and more like being forgotten, like standing still while the rest of the world rushes past. Doubt begins to whisper, a cold wind that finds every crack in your faith. Is anything happening? Does God even see? Maybe this silence is the answer you feared. It's the quiet hum of uncertainty, isn't it? The anxiety that tells you this season of barrenness means the promise is dead. You crave movement, visible progress, proof that your steps matter. But you sit in the stillness, and the stillness stretches on, vast and unnerving. This waiting feels like the longest, most challenging part of the journey, precisely because it's the least active, the most unseen. You wonder if this pause is punishment, a divine delay because you weren't good enough, prayed hard enough, or trusted perfectly. But what if this isn't a pause from the journey, but a vital part of it? The scripture in James 1:3-4 offers a different lens, knowing that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. The testing isn't just the storm. Sometimes it's the long, quiet wait after the storm. It's the winter season for the roots. Just as a tree draws energy inward during the cold, unseen months, pushing its roots deeper into the dark, hidden earth, waiting in faith allows God to cultivate spiritual resilience within you. The delay isn't punishment, it's process. It's God building inner strength where no eye can see, preparing you for the winds and storms of seasons yet to come. Consider the mighty oak, its visible growth, the spreading branches, the thick trunk, is only possible because of the unseen, underground work. The roots are the anchor, the lifeline, the gatherers of nourishment. Your waiting season is this root-building time. God is not idle. He's working beneath the surface of your circumstances, strengthening your foundation, deepening your dependence on Him, not the outcome. He's producing perseverance, that quiet, stubborn refusal to quit, the strength that comes not from striving, but from simply enduring with faith. This perseverance is finishing its work, making you mature, complete, lacking nothing needed for whatever is next. The desert isn't always a place of lack. Sometimes it's the place God reveals what you truly lack, so He can provide it within you. This hidden season isn't a sign of God's absence, but His intimate presence, shaping you in the stillness. He is cultivating patience, teaching you the rhythm of His timing, revealing layers of trust you didn't know you possessed. He meets your real-world fear that nothing is happening with the divine promise that everything crucial is happening, just out of sight. Your fear of being forgotten is met with the truth that you are being refined. Your anxiety about the future is met with the quiet assurance that He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. Allow yourself to lean into this hidden work. Surrender the need to see progress and trust the God who works in the dark, in the quiet, in the waiting. He is building roots deep within you, roots that will anchor you through future storms, roots that will draw life from hidden springs, roots that will ultimately support the visible, abundant fruit He is preparing you to bear. What feels like barrenness might be the birthplace of your deepest strength. What feels like silence might be the sound of God's quiet, consistent work. Trust the process. Trust the gardener. Let the waiting build your roots deep. The calendar page turns, The seasons shift, but the answer you're waiting for remains shrouded in mist. Another day dawns, holding the same uncertainty as the one before. You check your phone less now, sensing the quiet that will meet you. That heavy, persistent quiet. It's the silence after a desperate prayer, the space where an expected miracle hasn't landed. This is the weight, and oh, how it presses against the soul. A relentless pressure that doesn't just test our patience, but probes the very foundations of our faith. The discomfort isn't random. It's a divine spotlight shining into the hidden chambers of our hearts, illuminating what we truly believe about God when the path forward is dark. Do we trust Him only when the landscape looks like our carefully drawn map? When the winds blow favorably and the river flows exactly where we want it to go? Or is our trust as fragile as a whisper, dependent on Him saying yes precisely when we demand it? The waiting exposes the idols we cling to without realizing. The idol of control, where we believe our grip on the rudder is stronger than His hand on the waves. It reveals our demand for immediate gratification, treating God like a vending machine rather than the sovereign King whose timing is perfect, even when incomprehensible. The wait isn't a punishment, it's a crucible. Like gold refined by fire, our faith is put through intense heat, burning away the dross of self-reliance, the fear of uncertainty, the need for instant results. Perhaps the greatest revelation in the wait is our often shallow understanding of God's sovereignty. We speak of it in Sunday school, but do we live it when the job offer doesn't come, when the relationship doesn't mend, when the healing doesn't arrive on our schedule? Waiting forces us to confront the possibility that God's not yet is not a denial, but a deeper preparation for us or for the circumstance. It's in the wilderness of waiting that the manna falls daily, teaching us moment by moment dependence, not on stored provisions, but on His faithful hand. This season isn't empty time. It's holy ground, revealing our desperate need for Him and refining our trust until it's not based on what we see or what we have, but purely on who He is. It's a faith that believes God is good even when the good hasn't arrived yet. Can you lean into the burning? Can you allow the wait to purify your trust, leaving behind not the dregs of disappointment, but the pure gold of reliance on Him alone? He isn't asking for your perfect timing, just your surrendered heart in the interim. The heat rises, a dry, suffocating air that presses against your chest. This isn't a controlled burn. It feels like wildfire, consuming the landscape you thought was stable. Everything you relied on, comfort, clarity, a predictable future, is being scorched. Doubt whispers like dry leaves skittering across the ground. Where is God in this furnace? Did He forget you in the flames? This moment, this crucible, is the landscape of faith through the fire. Biblical faith was never promised as a stroll through manicured gardens, free from thorns or heat. It's the gritty, unyielding trust that persists through the very things that threaten to reduce you to ash. It's the faith that stands firm when every fiber of your being screams for surrender, for collapse, for the despair to finally take hold. Waiting. Oh, waiting is the ultimate accelerant in this fire. The prolonged uncertainty, the unanswered prayers stretching into desolate years, the hope deferred that makes the heart sick. These forces you into a through-the-fire faith. A faith that learns to cling, not just to the hope of future blessings or past comforts, but to the unchanging, unshakable character of God Himself. It's knowing deep in the marrow of your bones that He is faithful, even when the evidence your eyes seek is scarce, hidden behind smoke and embers. It's trusting His goodness when the circumstances feel utterly devoid of it. This faith doesn't deny the pain or the fear. It acknowledges the fire is real, hot, and terrifying. But it chooses, actively, consistently, to believe through the heat, not around it. It's the paradox of finding strength in weakness, of discovering peace in the midst of turmoil, of seeing possibility when all seems lost. God isn't asking you to extinguish the fire. He's inviting you to walk with Him through it. Perhaps you feel the blistering heat right now. The pressure is immense, the future unclear, and the temptation to just lie down and let the flames consume you is powerful. But look closely at the story of those who've walked this path before. They didn't emerge unscathed, but they emerged refined. The fire didn't destroy them, it purified them. Their faith wasn't proven in the absence of trial, but in their endurance within it, clinging to the hand that walked with them through the very center of the blaze. This fire is not meant to break you beyond repair, but to forge a faith in you that is stronger, purer, and more intimately connected to the faithfulness of God than you ever thought possible. Let the heat reveal what is true and lasting: His presence, His character, His unwavering love. Trust that even in this fire, He is present, He is working, and He is faithful. You sit in the quiet ache of unwanted stillness, the kind that settles deep in your bones when the road ahead seems blocked, the door stubbornly shut. Maybe you've been there for months, maybe years, in a place you didn't choose, feeling trapped, forgotten, your dreams gathering dust like relics of a brighter past. You wonder if anyone sees you, truly sees the weight of this waiting, if your struggle even registers in the vastness of the universe, or, more specifically, in the heart of God. This feeling, this desolate pause, is ancient. It touches every soul who has ever found themselves unexpectedly in a pit. Consider Joseph, young, full of promise, blessed with vivid dreams painted by the divine hand. He was the favored son, clothed in a coat of many colors, a symbol of his father's love and the bright future that seems so certain. But favor can breed resentment, and dreams can stir envy. His own brothers, blinded by jealousy, turned on him. They stripped him of his coat, of his identity, and threw him into a pit, a dry well, a symbol of abandonment and hopelessness. One moment, standing on the sunlit surface, the next, plunged into darkness, the voices of his betrayers echoing above before fading away. This was his first pit, a brutal descent from the mountaintop of favor into the valley of betrayal. But the pit was only the beginning of his wilderness journey. Pulled from the well, he was sold into slavery, taken far from his home and family, forced into a life of servitude in a foreign land. Yet, even in the house of Potiphar, a spark of his former brilliance shone through. He was diligent, trustworthy, and the favor of God rested upon him, causing everything he touched to prosper. He rose to a position of authority, the weight of his chains momentarily lighter under the surprising grace of his circumstances. Hope, a fragile mustard seed, perhaps began to sprout in the parched ground of his new reality. Just when a semblance of stability appeared, another storm gathered. A false accusation, a wicked lie twisted by malice, ripped him from the house of Potiphar and cast him into another prison, not a dry well this time, but the king's official jail. From favored son to slave, now to prisoner. Each step down was deeper, darker, more isolating. In this prison, he was confined, his movements restricted, his future seemingly cancelled. He interpreted dreams for fellow inmates, a cupbearer and a baker, proving his gift remained even in chains. He asked the cupbearer, restored to Pharaoh's service, to remember him. But memory, like loyalty, can be a fleeting thing in the corridors of power. He was forgotten. 2 full years passed, 2 years added to the decade already spent in exile and bondage. 13 years in total, a long, slow season of waiting in the deepest pits of life. And yet, the narrative, anchored in eternal truth, whispers a consistent refrain throughout this ordeal. The Lord was with Joseph. Think on the gentle poetic paradox here. God was most present in the place of Joseph's greatest absence. Absence from family, absence from freedom, absence from justice. His circumstances were undeniably dire, suffocating even. But God's presence was a quiet, constant current beneath the turbulent surface. It wasn't a visible presence that broke open the prison doors prematurely. It wasn't a miraculous rescue that bypassed the suffering. It was an abiding, strengthening, shaping presence within the suffering. Joseph's wait wasn't wasted time. It wasn't merely punishment or divine neglect. It was, perhaps, the most profound paradox of all, the intricate, painful pathway God used to prepare him. The pit taught him humility. Slavery taught him resilience. The prison taught him patience and honed his administrative skills among the inmates. The betrayal stripped away youthful arrogance, replacing it with wisdom forged in fire. The waiting wasn't an empty void. It was a fertile, though painful, ground where God cultivated the character and capacity needed for the unimaginable future. He was being prepared, not for release, but for the palace. He was being equipped, not just for his own redemption, but to save an entire nation, including the very family who had cast him away. Maybe your pit isn't a dry well, or your prison isn't made of stone and bars. Maybe it's a waiting room of illness, a season of unemployment, a relationship breakdown, a prolonged season of unfulfilled longing, or the crushing weight of anxiety that confines your spirit. You feel forgotten. Your prayers seem to hit a ceiling, and the injustice of your situation feels like a heavy chain. The truth of Joseph's story doesn't promise a speedy exit from your pit, but it promises the same divine presence in your pit. The Lord was with Joseph. Is he not with you? Can you trust that your waiting isn't wasted time, but is in God's mysterious economy, the very process shaping you for what comes next? Can you lean into the quiet call to reflection, acknowledging the pain, but also looking for the subtle signs of His presence, trusting that even in the deepest shadows He is with you, weaving your story into His larger saving plan? You look out at the horizon of your life, searching for a sign, any flicker of movement in the vast, still landscape of your waiting. Days stretch into weeks, weeks into months, and the circumstances you're praying about remain stubbornly unchanged. The promotion hasn't materialized. The relationship hasn't healed. The door hasn't opened. You feel stagnant, stuck, like a boat moored in a harbor while the ocean beckons, yet the ropes refuse to loosen. The silence feels deafening. Isn't that the hardest part? Not the struggle itself, but the perceived absence of God within the struggle. The chilling thought that maybe, just maybe, nothing is happening. But consider the seed. Tucked deep within the dark, cool earth, it is invisible to the world above. There's no fanfare, no sunlight bathing it in glory. It seems dormant, inactive, perhaps even lifeless. Yet within that stillness, a miracle is unfolding. Water is absorbed, nutrients are drawn in, cells are dividing. A tiny root is reaching down, a fragile shoot is pushing up. It's a period of intense, vital, unseen growth, preparing for the moment it will break through the surface and greet the sun. Your wait is often that subterranean season. While you are looking for the visible outcome, the sprout, the flower, the harvest, God is doing invisible work. He is aligning circumstances you couldn't possibly foresee, moving pieces on a cosmic chessboard. He is preparing hearts, not just the hearts of others involved in your situation, but your heart too. He is cultivating patience where there was panic, faith where there was doubt, strength where there was weariness. He is orchestrating details, weaving together threads you can't even see, creating a tapestry far more intricate and beautiful than the simple, straight line you might have envisioned. Just as a skilled weaver works on the underside of the loom, creating a pattern that only becomes clear when the cloth is turned over, God is working beneath the surface of your life. Your wait is not wasted time. It is part of a larger, divine tapestry. It is the necessary period of hidden growth, orchestrated by a master artist who sees the full picture, from the initial thread to the final, breathtaking design. Perhaps the breakthrough isn't delayed. Perhaps the necessary preparation is simply happening out of sight. The wilderness wasn't just a place of wandering for the Israelites. It was a place where God provided daily manna, where their faith was tested and refined, where they learned to trust His leading through a pillar of cloud and fire they couldn't control. He wasn't just waiting to give them the promised land. He was using the journey to prepare them for it. What hidden work is He doing in you or around you right now? What deep roots is He growing in the darkness of your waiting? Trust that the hand that holds the universe is also holding the threads of your life, intricately, purposefully, weaving a story of redemption and strength that will one day break through the surface for all to see. Rest in the quiet assurance that even when you see nothing, God is doing something profound. A calendar page's blur, marked by the sameness of unanswered days. You've petitioned the heavens, laid bare the ache in your soul, perhaps even negotiated with fate itself. Yet the desired outcome remains an elusive horizon. There is a peculiar stillness you find yourself inhabiting, a space where the usual levers of control feel unresponsive, even imaginary. This forced pause is not just inconvenient, it's unsettling. We are steeped in a culture that whispers fiercely about hustle, about self-made destinies, about quick fixes for every discomfort. We are taught to conquer, to seize, to manipulate circumstance until it bends to our will. Waiting, by its very nature, defies this ingrained programming. It strips away the comforting illusion that we are the architects of our own timing, the masters of our own unfolding story. Look around you, or maybe within you. See the way anxiety tightens its grip when the next step isn't clear, when the how and the when are completely out of reach. That discomfort, that restless energy that urges you to do something, anything, that's the crumbling facade of self-sufficiency beginning to crack. The unanswered petition, the prolonged wilderness season, the door that remains stubbornly shut, these are divine tools, not punishments. They are the quiet forces that reveal our profound, inescapable need for a power greater than ourselves. We are reminded, sometimes jarringly, that we are not the orchestrator, We are not God. The very foundations of our perceived control are shaken, exposing the deep well of human dependency that lies beneath. This dependency, this raw vulnerability unveiled in the waiting, can feel humbling, even disorienting. It's not a feeling we readily embrace. Yet, the spiritual paradox is breathtaking. It is precisely in this state of acknowledged need that the deepest, most authentic faith takes root. It is not the faith that declares, "I can do anything," but the faith that whispers, "He can do anything, and I desperately need Him to." Waiting is the forge where the illusion of our strength burns away, leaving behind the pure metal of trust in His strength. It's the forced stillness where we finally hear the quiet truth. We are not self-sufficient islands, but vessels utterly dependent on the sustaining breath of the Creator. It is in this space of profound need that true relationship, built not on our capability, but on His faithfulness, begins to flourish like a desert bloom after a long-awaited rain. The waiting, painful as it is not empty. It is filled with the revelation of our need, a revelation that is the very cornerstone of a life trusting God always. The pressure mounts. The deadline looms. The silence persists. The door remains shut. You feel it deep in your gut, that gnawing urge to do something, anything, to take the reins, to push, to manipulate the circumstances just a little, to open that door yourself. The weight has become unbearable, and the temptation to force a resolution, to craft your own answer, feels overwhelming. It's a story as old as time, etched into the very fabric of human impatience. Think of Sarah, the matriarch promised a son. Year after agonizing year, the promise remained, but the crib stayed empty. The weight felt eternal, impossible. The pressure to fulfill the promise somehow, anyhow, became too much to bear in her human frailty. So she took matters into her own hands. She offered Hagar, her maidservant, to Abraham, believing this forced union would somehow usher in the promised heir. It seemed like a practical solution, a way to help God along, to bring the promise into reality on their timetable. But forcing God's hand brought only heartache, jealousy, and generations of conflict. What seemed like a shortcut became a painful detour, complicating the very promise it was meant to expedite. Or picture the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai. God had just performed miracles, spoken fire and thunder, given them His law. Moses ascended the mountain to receive more instruction, but his return was delayed. A few weeks felt like an eternity in the wilderness uncertainty. Fear and impatience boiled over. The promise of a promised land felt distant. The presence of God seemed paused, and the urge to have a tangible, controllable God took hold. They pooled their gold, shaped a calf, and declared, "This is your God, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." They forced a manifestation, a physical anchor for their faith, because they couldn't bear the stillness, the unseen waiting for Moses' return. Forcing their own religious experience brought swift and devastating judgment, delaying their true progress towards the promised land even further. You see this same impulse in your own life, don't you? When the job hasn't materialized, you start stretching the truth on the resume. When the relationship is faltering, you try manipulative tactics to keep someone close. When the healing hasn't come, you chase every unverified cure, ignoring wisdom. When the financial breakthrough isn't here, you make impulsive, risky decisions driven by fear. You try to pry open the door God hasn't opened, prune the branches He hasn't revealed, paint the future He hasn't shown you yet. You try to build your own golden calf in the wilderness of waiting, a false sense of control, a manufactured outcome, a settlement for something less than the divine promise, just to ease the discomfort of trusting the unseen. But just as it did for Sarah and the Israelites, forcing God's hand never works. It adds thorns to the path, not petals. It creates complications you didn't foresee, wounds that take longer to heal, and ultimately, it hinders, rather than hastens, the true fulfillment God intends. His ways are higher, His timing is perfect, and His promises unfold according to His wisdom, not our anxious prodding. Perhaps the true strength lies not in doing, but in yielding, finding profound power in the stillness you desperately try to escape. Could it be that your greatest act of faith right now is simply to let go of the oars and trust the current of His providence? To resist the urge to build your own imperfect structure and instead stand firm on the foundation of His unwavering promise, even when the wait feels like an eternity. It is in that surrender, not the struggle, that His perfect plan begins to unfold. You sit in the quiet corner of your life, where the path ahead is hidden and the present feels stalled. You've prayed the prayers, marked the days, whispered the hopes, and the world asks, are you just waiting, sitting still? It feels like being becalmed at sea, sails slack, the horizon a distant mocking line. This season of waiting, whether for a breakthrough, a healing, an answer, a promise fulfilled, can feel like a void, a place where time stretches endlessly, and doing nothing seems like the only option. The fear whispers, you're missing it. You're supposed to be doing something, but what if the doing is found within the waiting? This isn't a passive paralysis God calls us to, it's an active trust. It's the quiet discipline of tending the small garden plot He's given you, even when you're waiting for the harvest of the promised field. While the big answers seem delayed, God isn't asking you to stop living, stop growing, stop serving. He's asking you to find Him in the mundane, the small acts of faithfulness that build the foundation for the future. The wilderness felt empty for the Israelites, but it was there God taught them dependence, provided daily bread, and trained them for battle. Your waiting room? It's not a holding pen, it's a training ground. You continue to pray, not because you need to remind God, but because prayer keeps you tethered to His heart. You open His Word, allowing its light to illuminate the single step before you, even when the road ahead is shrouded in mist. You serve the people right in front of you, pouring out love and kindness in the small cups you hold, trusting He will refill them. You care for your own soul, resting when weary, seeking counsel when lost, practicing gratitude when hope feels thin. This isn't busy work. It's holy obedience. It's walking in the light God has already given you, refusing to sit in manufactured darkness just because the sun hasn't risen on the full promise yet. Perhaps the greatest paradox of the waiting is finding your deepest strength in the surrender to stillness, discovering abundance in the act of giving when you feel you have nothing left to give, and seeing the grandest future built on the tiniest, most faithful present actions. It's using the in-between as the very space where God equips you, refines you, and prepares you for the future He is meticulously crafting. So rise, not to force the outcome, but to faithfully live today, right where you are, with the resources and light God has given. Trusting God always means being faithful in the small while waiting for the big, seeing the waiting not as a pause, but as a vital, active part of His divine process. The calendar pages turn, marking off weeks, months, maybe even years you've been waiting for the answer, for the change, for the breakthrough. The silence can be deafening, a heavy blanket smothering hope. You whisper prayers into the void, wondering if the words dissipate like smoke, or if they even reach the heavens you yearn for. Doubt taps at the door, a persistent guest, suggesting perhaps you weren't heard, weren't important enough for intervention. Awaiting can feel like abandonment, like being stranded in a wilderness of unanswered questions. But consider this truth, a bedrock against the shifting sands of impatience and fear. Even Jesus waited. The Son of God, perfect, ready, filled with divine power, waited. 30 long years passed in Nazareth, a quiet life, seemingly ordinary, hidden from the public eye, before His ministry even began. Can you imagine? The Savior of the world, living a simple life, growing, learning, waiting for the Father's perfect timing. It wasn't passive idleness. It was a season of hidden preparation, a quiet unfolding, according to a divine blueprint no one but God could see. And after the unimaginable agony of the cross, the ultimate sacrifice, there was another wait. 3 days in the tomb. For the disciples, this was the terrifying, silent Saturday. The man they followed, the hope they clung to, was gone, buried behind a stone. It was the darkest day imaginable, a chasm of despair where all seemed lost. They couldn't see the morning, couldn't hear the angels already preparing the tomb. They only knew the silence, the loss, the crushing weight of finality. Their world had gone dark, and God seemed utterly silent. Yet that terrifying, silent Saturday wasn't the end. It was the necessary pause before the explosion of divine power, the greatest breakthrough in the history of the cosmos, the resurrection. The silence in the tomb was God's purposeful hush before the triumphant shout of victory over death. The darkest night preceded the brightest dawn. If God's perfect Son waited, if the very plan of salvation, the redemption of humanity, involved a painful period of silence, of waiting in the darkness before the light broke through, surely, we can trust Him in our own seasons of waiting. Your waiting is not wasted time. It might be the sacred ground where God is working most profoundly, unseen, unheard, preparing the soil for the breakthrough only He can bring. The stillness isn't abandonment. It is often preparation. You are asked to wait, not because God is slow, but because He is sovereign. The greatest strength is sometimes found in the deepest stillness, waiting on the move only He can make. Release the tight grip of control. Breathe deeply the truth that the one who orchestrated history's longest, most terrifying wait also brought forth history's brightest dawn. Trust Him with your silent Saturday, with your Nazareth years. He knows the way through the tomb to the morning. He waited, and because He waited, you can trust His timing for you. The calendar pages blur, each one a marker of time stretched thin, a monument to prayers you've whispered into the quiet, prayers that seem to echo back unanswered. It's been months, maybe years. The hopeful urgency that once fueled your requests has faded, replaced by a deep-seated weariness. You sit in the silence, wondering if your prayer was even heard. The wind taps the window, like God's whisper waiting for your stillness. But the answer you long for doesn't arrive. This ache, This profound fatigue that settles in the soul during prolonged seasons of waiting is a heavy burden. You look around and see others' prayers seemingly answered quickly, their journeys unfolding with a momentum you can only dream of. Doubt begins to whisper insidious questions. Is my faith too weak? Is my desire not righteous? Does God simply not care about this particular need, this deep longing that consumes your thoughts and steals your sleep? The effort it takes to keep believing, to maintain a posture of trust when every day feels like another day lost in the wilderness, becomes exhausting. The oil in your lamp of hope feels dangerously low. You find yourself going through the motions of faith, clinging to what you know is true, but the vibrancy is dimming. It's a walk through a dry and weary land where there is no water. Let's be honest with each other, and more importantly, with God. Long waits are exhausting. The soul grows weary when months turn into years, when the same prayer goes unanswered for what feels like an eternity. It's okay to acknowledge this fatigue. The Bible doesn't shy away from the raw, often painful human experience of waiting. Even the prophets, the mighty men and women of faith, wrestled with the silence of God. Think of Habakkuk, a prophet burdened by the injustice and suffering he saw. He cried out, his voice filled with desperation and weariness. "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save?" Habakkuk 1:2. His lament wasn't a polite suggestion or a gentle inquiry. It was a cry of the heart, a voice raised in frustration and bewilderment at the apparent delay of divine intervention. The Bible gives us explicit permission to lament, to voice our frustration, our weariness, our deepest fears and disappointments directly to God. He doesn't require us to plaster on a fake smile and pretend we're perfectly fine, overflowing with unwavering joy, when our reality is one of aching longing and depleted strength. He invites our raw honesty, even in the longest seasons of waiting. He knows the depth of your weariness. He sees the tears you cry in secret, the moments you feel too weak to even pray. He doesn't condemn your questions. He welcomes them. He isn't intimidated by your fatigue. He is compassionate towards it. Your authenticity doesn't push him away. It draws you closer into the space where true healing and comfort reside. Perhaps the deepest fear in the long wait isn't just that the prayer won't be answered, but that you are being forgotten, that in the grand, sweeping narrative of God's purposes, your small, personal story has been overlooked, paused indefinitely. You fear that the mustard seed of faith you planted is withering because the rain of blessing hasn't come. But God remembers. He remembers His promises, and He remembers you. The wilderness isn't a sign of His absence, but often a place of intense formation. Just as gold is refined in fire, faith is often purified and deepened in the waiting. There is a quiet power in acknowledging the weariness without letting it become the final word. It is a paradoxical strength found in admitting weakness. You don't have to muster up superhuman resilience. You simply have to bring your tired self to the one who never grows weary. He is the wellspring that can refresh your parched soul. He is the quiet assurance that sustains you when sight fails. He is the anchor when the storm of doubt rages. He is not asking for your exhausted striving. He is asking for your weary surrender. Surrender the need to understand the timeline. Surrender the fear of being overlooked. Surrender the burden of carrying this weight alone. Let this moment be a quiet call to reflection. Where are you holding back your true feelings from God? What mask are you wearing, even before the one who sees your innermost being? There is healing in honest lament, a pathway to renewed trust that begins not with pretending you are strong, but with admitting how truly weary you are. Give him the burden of the weight. Pour out the frustration, the questions, the sheer exhaustion. He can handle it. And in that moment of authentic vulnerability, perhaps you will hear his gentle whisper, not necessarily the answer you expected, but the quiet assurance that he is with you in the wait, walking the long road beside you. Trust isn't the absence of weariness, but the choice to keep walking with him even when the path is long and your feet ache. He meets your real-world fear of being forgotten with his timeless promise, "Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you." Hebrews 13, verse 5. This truth is the lamp that can guide you through the longest night. You sit there again, the familiar weight settling on your shoulders. The calendar pages turn, the seasons change, but the one thing you're waiting for remains stubbornly out of reach. It's the promotion that hasn't materialized, the relationship that hasn't healed, the prayer that feels lost in the vast, silent expanse of the heavens. You picture the breakthrough, the moment the answer arrives, and sometimes that vision is the only thing that fuels you. But as the days stretch into weeks, and weeks into months, a quiet anxiety begins to whisper, "Did God forget? Am I somehow missing it?" This space, this waiting room of life, feels empty, doesn't it? Like a barren desert stretching out before you, the promised land, a shimmering, distant mirage. You scan the horizon, desperate for any sign of movement, any flicker of divine intervention. Your spiritual lamp feels low on oil, your energy depleted by the constant vigilance. It's easy to believe that God is found at the destination, after the trial, once the answer finally drops into your lap. But the profound, life-altering truth, the one that anchors you when the ground beneath you feels uncertain, is this: God is not just waiting for you at the finish line. He is walking with you, step by quiet step, in the wilderness. Finding God in the wait isn't about passively enduring. It's about actively perceiving his presence in the very space you long to escape. He is the cool shade in the heat of your impatience, the gentle rain that nourishes your parched spirit when disappointment threatens to consume you. You might be looking for a booming voice or a dramatic parting of the seas, but he is often found in the stillness, the gentle whisper you only hear when you quiet your striving. He is the quiet strength that rises within you when weariness begs you to collapse. He is the unshakable peace that guards your heart and mind, standing watch against the onslaught of worry. Think of the disciples, told to wait in Jerusalem for the promise of the Spirit. They weren't given a timeline or a detailed itinerary. They were simply told to wait. And in that waiting, huddled together in faith, they encountered God in a way they never had before. The wait wasn't just a delay. It was the sacred crucible in which their unity was forged. Their anticipation sharpened. Their understanding deepened. It was the preparation, the necessary ripening before the harvest. Maybe you've been praying for the storm to pass, desperate for the waves to cease their crashing. But God, in his infinite wisdom, might be teaching you to walk on the water during the storm. He isn't always removing the challenge. Often, he is revealing himself in the midst of it. He is the anchor that holds, the steady hand that guides the rudder, the voice that calms your spirit, even if the winds still rage. The wait isn't empty time. It is pregnant with His potential, filled with lessons you can only learn when you are stretched thin, when your resources feel insufficient, when you are forced to rely solely on Him. Consider Joseph, languishing in a prison cell for years, forgotten and alone. Was God absent? Or was God weaving the tapestry of his future, thread by painstaking thread, in the darkness? Was He refining his character, stripping away pride, teaching him patience, preparing him for the immense responsibility that lay ahead? The prison was not a detour. It was a classroom. The waiting was not punishment. It was preparation. He didn't find God after he was released. He found God's faithfulness in the confinement. He learned to trust God's presence when his circumstances offered no visible hope. The greatest gift isn't always the destination itself, the arrived-at breakthrough, the answered prayer in the form you envisioned. Sometimes the most precious treasure is the encounter with God on the journey, in the wilderness, during the wait. It is discovering that His presence is enough, that His peace surpasses your anxiety, that His strength is made perfect in your weakness, that He is closer than you imagine, even in the silence. He is the quiet confidence that takes root in your soul when you realize the waiting isn't about if He will act, but how He is working right now, refining you, drawing you closer, preparing you not just for the answer, but for the next step of walking intimately with Him. Your present moment, however uncertain, is saturated with His presence. Open your eyes to see Him in the wait. Look for the river in your desert, the lamp in your darkness, the quiet whisper in your soul. He is there, He is here, and He is finding you in the wait, transforming the space between the promise and the fulfillment into a sacred sanctuary of encounter. You've run the race until your breath is ragged, walked the path until your feet are bruised. The breakthrough you longed for feels distant, just a mirage on the horizon of your hope. The waiting season stretches like an endless wilderness, and weariness settles deep in your bones, a heavy cloak you can't shake off. You look at others soaring, running, walking with apparent ease, and a quiet doubt whispers, "Will I ever feel that strength again? Was the promise for me? Or just a beautiful story for someone else?" This feeling is a familiar shadow for many, the weight of unfulfilled expectation pressing down. But lift your gaze, weary soul, and remember the one before the promise of soaring comes. Isaiah 40:31 isn't just a promise of breakthrough. It's a promise of renewal for those who hope in the Lord. It follows a breathtaking declaration of God's infinite power. He measures the waters in the hollow of His hand, comprehends the dust of the earth in a balance, sits above the circle of the earth. This is the God whose timing you question. His power isn't constrained by your calendar or your impatience. His sovereignty dictates the seasons of your life, the length of the wait, the moment of release. Your breakthrough is coming, a seed already planted in the rich soil of His purpose. But it ripens under His sun, not yours. And the waiting? Oh, the waiting is not a void. It is a sacred kiln. It melts down impurities, forges resilience you didn't know you had. It teaches you to lean, not on your dwindling strength, but on His enduring power. You learn to walk by faith, not by the visible signs of progress. It is in the quiet stillness of the wait that God often prepares you for the breakthrough, building the character, teaching the lessons, deepening the dependence required to steward the blessing when it arrives. Sometimes, the deepest strength is found not in running, but in standing still and trusting. This waiting is a peculiar grace, often unseen until the breakthrough illuminates the path behind you, revealing how every moment of weary walking prepared your legs for the final sprint. Every season of quiet hoping expanded your lungs for the eventual soaring. And then, when His perfect moment dawns, the promise unfolds. Those who hoped, who waited, who learned to trust in the God of infinite power, they will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, catching the divine thermals of His grace. They will run and not grow weary, walk and not faint, not because they suddenly generated infinite energy, but because they are now powered by His strength, walking in His timing, living out His breakthrough. The fulfillment is sweeter because you know the cost of the wait. The lesson is deeper because you learned it in the valley. So breathe deep, weary heart. Release the anxiety tied to the calendar. Your hope is not in the breakthrough itself, but in the God who holds the breakthrough. Trust His timing. Lean into the preparation the waiting provides. Your moment is coming, shaped and perfected by the one who knows the end from the beginning. Rest in that truth and find strength not just for the wait, but in the wait itself. You've walked through this journey of waiting, perhaps with tears, with questions, with moments of doubt clinging to moments of faith. The path has felt long, hasn't it? Like traversing a vast, silent wilderness where each step echoes with uncertainty. You prayed, you fasted, you waited, and still, silence. Maybe this message is the sign you didn't know you needed. It's easy in the quiet to feel forgotten, overlooked by the very God you are reaching for. The wind outside taps the window, like God's whisper waiting for your stillness, for you to listen past the noise of your own striving. Remember this, your wait is seen, every tear collected, every whispered plea held in His memory. Your prayers are heard, rising like incense before His throne, even when the answer feels distant. That silence you feel? It is not God's absence. It is often the quiet space where He is working most profoundly in your heart and orchestrating details beyond your sight. Like a master craftsman refining gold in the furnace, or a gardener tending the deep, unseen roots of a mighty tree, He is present in the process. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't abandoned His promise. He is refining your faith, deepening your roots, and preparing you for the fullness of His blessing. This hidden season is not a pause in your story, but the vital, often most profound chapter. God is using this quiet to write resilience into your soul, to etch His faithfulness onto your spirit. The journey through waiting transforms you, making you more reliant on Him, more resilient in spirit, and ultimately more radiant with His presence. It's in the stillness that we learn the deepest lesson, trusting His heart, not just His hand. It's trusting who He is, His perfect wisdom, His unwavering love, His sovereign goodness, even when we cannot see what He is doing, His hand. It's a surrender of the timeline, a release of the frantic grip on our own plan, in exchange for the peaceful assurance of His perfect timing. Release the grip of your own timeline. Trust the heart of the one who holds eternity in His hands. Let the quiet assurance of His faithfulness wash over you. Even in the longest night, dawn will break, Even in the deepest silence, His presence sings over you, a melody of unwavering love and perfect timing. The waiting feels long, but the story is still unfolding, written by a hand you cannot yet see, guided by a heart you can absolutely trust. They didn't see the end, but they trusted the author, and that was enough.